Um, okay, so I interviewed Bryce Wilcox, and he is a small scale alfalfa and melon farmer just in Syracuse, Utah. Oh, okay. So I wanted to interview Bryce because he is also a civil engineer. He works for JUB. So I thought it'd be interesting to interview an engineer who's also a farmer to see if, he like practices anything that he's learned throughout his engineering career. I also wanted to know more about alfalfa and melon farming affected by, urban sprawl and affected by different neighborhoods around the farm. Um, so that was my purpose of the interview. This is where the farm is located, just in Syracuse, Utah, and um, the farm is about 35 acres, is what Bryce said. And so yeah, I'll get into the interview. Thanks again for agreeing to do this. Appreciate you taking your time. No problem. Um, so knowing you, I understand you own a farm or you work on a farm. Is that correct? Yeah, our family owns a farm. Awesome. So how big would you say that farm is, and like what kind of crops do you plant on it? So the farm is about 35 acres, and we grow um, alfalfa, watermelons, cantaloupes, and pumpkins. Uh, about 20, about 25 acres, 28 acres of it's in alfalfa. The rest of it's in a pasture and pumpkins and watermelons. Um, so why do you guys farm? Do you sell it to wholesalers? Do you have like farmers market? So like how do you guys make money off that farm? It makes enough money to keep it going. Is about all it does, and to pay the kids to help out during the summer. You have something to do, and so when we used to sell it to the produce to distributors. Um, Now we just have a wagon out front that has a little produce market that people can come buy what they want and do that just so that'll run from about oh first of August through October through Halloween. Okay. With the watermelon, the cantaloupes, and then going to pumpkins, and so we do it just on an honor system. So I just have a little drop box out there and a Venmo code for people to pay. We just restock it every couple days. So that's what we do with the produce. For the alfalfa, we work with um, a neighbor buys about half of it that he then sells. He has a alfalfa business, I guess you could say, where he sells it to horse trainers, things like that. So he'll buy about half of it, and then we'll sell the other part that we don't need to just people with animals that just need the feed. How do you water your plants, and where does that water come from? So we're fed from water from the Davis and Weber Canal system. That comes from the Weber River. It's diverted out of the Weber River, um, just up the mouth of Weber Canyon through a diversion structure, and then it comes down through the Davis and Weber Canal, or basically it kind of follows Hill Air Force Base around through South Weber and Riverdale, and then it turns and comes across Clearfield at Hill Air Force Base. And so we're about 10 miles down the system on the canal where our turnout is. Um, and so they turn it out of the Davis Weaver Canal, then it goes into the ditch system. And we're on the Clearfield irrigation ditch. And so all of the farmers out that are left out there have shares of the canal company to shares of water. And so then it's just delivered into those ditches, and then it has to go um, about 4 miles, 4 to 5 miles west of the main canal. So it just travels through piped ditches out to where our farm is. We're one of the last farms on the ditch before it hits the Great Salt Lake down there. So it's got a long way to travel from the Weber River up in Weber Canyon down to where our farm is.
Yeah. So then how is that water regulated? Is it like you have to buy water shares or is it based off your acreage?
Yeah, so you buy shares or own shares of the Davis and Weber Canal Company, and they just split it proportionally among their shares. So each share represents approximately 6 acre-feet of water for the year.
Okay.
And so uh, we run 12 shares, so that's where we get our source from. And then when it gets to our farm, we just flood it. We flood irrigate
Okay.
our, our farm.
How often do you flood irrigate? Do you flood irrigate just alfalfa or do you also flood irrigate the cantaloupes?
That's a great question. We flood irrigate everything. Right now, we're not set up on a sprinkler system. We're kind of out where it's flat, so we'd have to put in a pump and some other stuff to sprinkle, which may happen sometime. But right now, we're just flood irrigating. So our water turn is every 6.5 days. We get a water turn for about 22 hours. Um, and it's somewhere our stream of water that comes to our farm is approximately 2 CFS, somewhere in there. And so our alfalfa is starting about um, June, first week or so of June. We'll water that every 2 weeks. So it'll get flood irrigated every 2 weeks. And it's cut about every 5 weeks. So, and then the watermelons, pumpkins, cantaloupes, they get irrigated every week once they get established. So usually we'll plant them between May and June, and usually about first or second week in June, then we start watering them every week until they're ready to harvest.
Nice. So regarding flood irrigation, how does your field do with runoff? Do you guys have like berms to prevent runoff, or is it just enough flow that it's able to soak up before?
No, that's a great question. So runoff with flood irrigation, runoff is always a concern. So on ours, we're getting landlocked by subdivisions and streets, and so the main street to the west has several stuff off of their storm drain system back into our farm. So we used to drain into an old tailwater ditch, and then when the city came through and piped the ditch and widened the roadway, they put our connections to their storm drain system. So everything, we have berms on the sides to keep us from flooding out neighbors and across the bottom to control it, and then it's just directed to the these outlet pipes and tied to the storm drain system.
There's a few questions about alfalfa you guys grow.
Sure.
In class, we learned that alfalfa can create some nitrogen, which can be used for some fertilizer. So do you guys fertilize your own alfalfa, or do you just let it fertilize itself?
We do, but we don't put any nitrogen down. We put phosphorus and potassium down. And so yeah, so typically you're correct. The alfalfa produces plenty of nitrogen into the soil, but the alfalfa pulls out phosphorus and potassium out of the ground, and so each spring we'll do a soil test. We'll send it up to the USU Extension Soil Lab up at Utah State, and they'll run a test on it and tell us where deficiencies are at in the soil, and that gives us a fertilizer recommendation of what to put down.
Do you like experience higher yield because of that? Have you done like analyze it when you haven't fertilized, or have you always been fertilizing?
We've done it where we haven't. We try and stay within kind of their guidelines. So the amount of fertilizer, so the nitrogen or the phosphorus and potassium typically stay in the soil if they're not being used by the plants. So depending on on the yield for that year and how much we put down the prior year. It just kind of depends on where it's at. If the alfalfa doesn't have enough, trying to remember which one, I believe it's the potassium, it just doesn't grow very tall. And so you can really impact your yield by it.
And then do you use it, I'm assuming you use a different fertilizer for the melons that you grow as well?
On the melon, we typically haven't fertilized it. So we do a lot of crop rotation.
Okay.
And so what we'll do is we have our fields kind of divided up in about 5, 6 acre kind of blocks, just how they're irrigated. Um, and so what we'll do is as a hay patch gets ready to need to be replaced after about 8, 10 years or so, the hay patch starts to thin out, some of them die off a little bit and doesn't water as good. And so what we do is we'll go in and replace that hay patch with a pumpkin patch or a watermelon patch. And then all of the nitrogen that the alfalfa is put in the ground, the uh, the produce can use. And so gets out a great produce plant patch over for the so for we found that it lasts about 2 years or so. Um, before it starts depleting the nitrogen out of the ground that the alfalfa put in. And then after about 2 years, we're ready to replace another hay patch. And so we just move it down. And so it's just kind of our little rotation to keep the hay patches new, keeps the watermelon cantaloupes and plenty of nitrogen. And, and so it works out really well for us.
My last question is, when class we talked about like new emerging technology that farmers are using. Are there any like specific technologies or tools that have like benefited your farming or have helped you out?
Um, Not yet. There's a lot out there that we're kind of looking into doing. Like I said, we irrigate just using flood irrigation. We use the gated pipe, the white gated pipe you see across all the fields. So we kind of control where the water's going from that standpoint. We're looking into the options of pivots and the drip irrigation system so they can put in things like that. Our challenge is it's a pretty small farm, so at 35 acres, and so the expense to put in some of those systems is is quite expensive, and so we're trying to figure out if it makes sense for us to do that. We do more looking at different seed types as hybrid seeds come out, alfalfa. They have a Roundup Ready alfalfa, so basically we can spray our alfalfa a couple times a year with Roundup, and it won't affect the alfalfa, but it'll kill all the weeds in it. So allows us to produce a high quality hay with very few weeds in it, which is more nutritious for animals. And so we do more on that way than some of the other systems. So.
Well, that's all the questions I had. Thank you so much again for letting me interview you. You had great answers. I hope you learned quite a bit. So
Um,
um,
okay. So in summary, it was really cool to interview Bryce because he's very knowledgeable on the subject and farming. And I learned that he actually tests the soil, which I wasn't expecting. I was surprised that a farmer actually tests the soil to see what kind of nutrients he need to put in. And he actually puts in phosphorus and nitrogen. Then he also like I don't know if you guys caught it, but the urban sprawl just is affecting farmers because now that they have to um control their water flow a little more and it's a little harder to get water out into the farms. Um but yeah, and so the farm also uses canals and different pipes to transfer the water to the river. Um and so yeah, it was a good experience and I learned a lot interviewing Bryce. It's
Thank you.